Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, we've got a really interesting show today because we're going to give you some practical tips for navigating loss. And I know you're really going to enjoy our show. We've got a great guest. Heidi, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Sure, Mom. And like you said, we'll be talking about practical tips for navigating loss with Sweta Vikram. And she is an international speaker and best-selling author of 14 books and has a doctorate of Ayurveda. So she is Dr. Vikram. Her latest book is The Loss That Binds Us, 108 Tips on Coping with Grief and Loss. She has appeared on NBC, NPR, and in a documentary with Dr. Deepak Chopra. She has a master's degree from Columbia University in strategic communications and has been voted one of the most influential Asians of our time. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be talking to you both, to be talking to the community, and an intentional conversation about what people we grieve, how we heal, and all of that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for being on. I was so interested. I didn't read every one of your books. You have so many. They're fabulous, 14. I noticed that one of your books early on was actually about the loss of your grandfather and your aunt, right?
Yes.
Before you lost your parents, which is All Is Not Lost, Verse on Grief, which was interesting. And then in looking a little further, I saw that your father had lost a sister when he was in his 20s, correct?
Yes.
So that's interesting that loss and grief and recovery really go deep for you, even with this last book, who's kind of more about your dad, right?
It is. And, my dad and I were really close. We were like buddies. So he was my critique, he was my critic, he was my confidant, that safe space in the world. And he would often say, in the world that we come from, like in South Asian culture, and I think across cultures, we don't tend to talk about things that make us uncomfortable, grief being one of them. And I used to ask a lot of questions about his sister, whom I never met because, my dad lost him when he was very young. My mom had met her a few times and she would always praise her. But I was like, I don't see her pictures because, my uncle remarried. So it was the new wife. And they were all really nice people. But it's like, one chapter over on to the other. But I was like this curious writer looking for stories. And then my grandfather, my dad's dad, he died of throat cancer when I was 5, and he had lost his voice, but I would, every day after school, I would go to the hospital to visit him. He would write down notes, and all he wanted to do was he would ask me to sing. And then, he made a symbol, and then he drew a lotus, which is the national flower of India. And my aunt's name was one of the synonyms for lotus. And I didn't realize that decades later, the said stuff was, can you sing this song, in his writing? But the unsaid stuff was also talking about these losses, which again, culturally, also a lot of men have been trained to be really stoic with their grief. And he's a different generation. So all the more, it's like grief is nuanced. So I think all of these people were giving me cues like, you were going to talk about this, you're going to, but in their own time. And now writing about them, talking about them, sharing what's helped me it's through, to your point, it's been through writing, because how else, I don't know how else to make sense of the nonsense that hits us when grief shows up.
Yes, I noticed somewhere you do Ayurvedic medicine. Maybe you want to give a quick explanation of that.
Ayurveda is the science of life, and it's the ancient, most oldest medical system that stems from India, over 5,000 years old. Practiced differently in the United States. Here, it's looked at more of like a maintenance, complementary medicine in India, where I've done my internships. Like there are hospitals, Ayurvedic hospitals, like there's an ER unit, psychiatry, pediatrics, all of that. And the basic idea is it's a science of life. It's a living science. So how we eat, how we move, our diet and lifestyle impacts who we become and our well-being. And so when I say Ayurveda and grief, like, in our case, when I wrote The Loss That Binds Us, my latest book, unexpectedly, we lost my dad and my father-in-law within 2 days of each other. So shuttling between two continents, cities, homes, ICUs, you notice like some people really shut down. Some people are very like, what needs to be done? Some are curled up on the couch, and people's grieving process is different. But also the world we live in, there's a lot of judgment. Oh, why does that one shut down? People are curious, but it's also coming from a place of judgment. Or like, how does this one have their act together? And Ayurveda explains it's made up, human beings are made up of elements. Or it's called a constitution, the doshas, which is basically the DNA. We are all born with certain doshas, and imbalances, when that happen, that's when we start to fall sick. So the idea is to go back to your doshic balance, your constitution, right? And so how people respond is basically a reflection of what their constitution is. So I
So how
find
do you go back when you say you have to go back? What does that mean?
to go back as in like, so this is a state of balance, let's just say. So here is a little bit of imbalance. And then this is an extreme state of imbalance. So in Ayurveda, every disease has 6 stages. So sixth
Oh,
stage
wow.
is a full-blown disease. But, in stage 2, 3, it hasn't spread to the other parts. So you can
Okay.
come, revert to that place of equanimity, so to speak.
That's so interesting because I think one case in point I was, I kind of follow because of the book, what's happening with the widow world, and widowers will die a year after their wives.
Absolutely. And it's the mind-body connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And broken heart literally does kill people. And I think the older we get into our relationships, I don't mean in terms of age, I mean in terms of how long you've spent with the person, there is this level of dependence, emotional, everything, wet silence. So that's about the widows in India. And it's about this conversation around this chapter of life is so cruel when it gets over. And then we have, and in the old days, now things are different. But when I would look at my grandmother, because my dad's dad died when I was 5, she was very well taken care of, all of that. But I remember asking my dad, but she doesn't have girlfriends. She's not going on trips with anyone. So we just assume a woman, just because she's lost a husband, there are those, and I didn't talk to him about the intimacy, but like it was something, and that's something I cover in the book. Like maybe she wants to be with another man. And
Right.
those conversations don't happen, which has changed today. Widows remarry and people understand the importance of partnership, healthy relationships. But like I would look at my grandmother, I was like, yeah, nice clothes, nice home, surrounded by family. But you know what? Sometimes we all just want to hang out with the friends. And she
Right.
didn't have that.
Right.
And when my mom passed away, I wrote the book. It is a poetry collection. It's called Saris and a Single Malt. And how she was this woman who wore her saris all the time. She was beautiful, but she drank a single malt. So like, and it's the journey from when we got the call and she had passed away, but it's also reminding people like we shouldn't be defining who people are. She wore her sari and her traditions just as well as she drank a whiskey.
I like that.
Now, when she died, your father lived another 9 years, right?
He did.
So it's interesting because, like my mom said, you do see women often, outlive men, and then men don't do so well on their own. And was he on his own for 9 years, or did he live with you, or what were the expectations for you? Did you feel like you needed to take care of him, or what happened?
No, so my dad was a revolutionary man for his generation. So my brother lives in Singapore, and he said, no, I want to live by myself. I'll come visit. So he
Wow.
visited us once a year. He visited my brother once a year, 2 weeks. He's like, more than 2 weeks, you're cramping my lifestyle, I'm cramping your lifestyle. And I'm just paraphrasing what he would say. And I would visit him twice a year. My brother would visit him. Our partners, my brother's daughters, we would all visit him. And then 2 years ago, he moved to a senior living. And this place was great. We all wanted to live there because, it's farm to table food. He's playing bridge. There's movie club. So I think one of the things, I've learned so many things from my dad, but one of the things is like, if you have purpose on a daily basis, life is, he was like, my partner is gone and it's a loss I can't explain to people. And I choose not to. But what I have left is like, so he was an active Rotarian. He was very involved. So in, helping humanity, social justice, all of that. So he was busy from sunrise to sundown.
Wow.
Yeah. So that added a lot of value to his life. And he was very popular with his friends, amongst family, with his children. So he was an exceptional case because I've seen that with my mom's dad. I've seen that with my uncles. Most of them haven't made it after they, after the wife passed away.
So your dad lived in India, right?
He did.
Yeah. Do you see any difference in community in India as opposed to the United States after a death or a loss?
Absolutely. People show up for each other a lot more in India, in Asia, period. It's not an individualistic society, right? It's more about community. So people are there for each other. And, I have friends who were born and raised here whose parents are in senior living here or they've passed away since. And I looked at my dad's life, no comparison. Here, there is still a level of isolation and loneliness. And just the way Asian culture is, people, sometimes it can feel annoying, like, okay, I really want to be alone. But people, just because you say, I need a breather, go get your coffee, no one is giving you that. And there are times when you're grieving, when you try to isolate yourself, but it helps if there is someone with you. So the power of community is way stronger back in the East.
Yeah. So talk about your 108 significant number of things that you have to help people. What are some of your favorite tips?
So two ends of the spectrum. One part I did want to talk about and then go on to the part of hope is when the grief is so raw and we live in a society where you're just told to highlight only the good stuff, because as if grief is contagious and it's taboo and let's not talk about difficult things. And I wanted to share that with people. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have that little envy. It's okay when you go into that dark space, because I kept wondering, why my mom? Why my dad? Like I have, I know people in their 50s and 60s, and knock on wood, they have healthy, happy parents. My parents are both gone and I haven't turned 50 yet. So you have these questions, and it's okay if you're not taking those questions and hurting anyone or including yourself. It's all transient. So that's something I really wanted to address because, again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a grieving daughter. And when I started sharing that with people, people were like, yeah, I felt that. But, I felt like I'd be shunned if I share it. I was like, and that's the trouble. Everything needs to be a highlighted reel on Instagram about how glorious you are, even during grief. And that's humanly impossible. Then the middle stage is practicing self-care, which it's very easy to not want to move, to be face down on whatever is your coping mechanism. But that's when relying on habits versus motivation can be very helpful. Like, I didn't ask myself if I wanted to go for a walk. I didn't ask myself if I wanted to practice yoga or cook. It's things that you do because, and you both know this, when grief strikes, our immunity goes down. Takes a toll on our mental well-being. So, and the gut-brain connection is very real. What we feed ourselves will impact how we think. And then in the later part of the book is grief doesn't always have to be this sad thing. I laugh at the silliness of my dad and the things that he would do, or, celebrate him or celebrate my father-in-law or my mom for that matter. So whether it's like doing a little dinner party with the cousins for his birthday, or cooking mom's favorite dish, or ordering in her favorite Thai food for Mother's Day. So volunteering to causes that would have mattered to them, creating an altar. So I think even though the grieving journey is an individual's, because it depends on what they're grieving, who they're grieving, what the relationship was like. But I think we are not that unique in our human nuanced emotions, right? Because we've all been told, no. Men have been told, don't cry. Women have been told, you cry too much, don't feel so many things, or move on. And how do you move on from someone you've loved? Doesn't mean you sit in a puddle and cry all day, but it's like I became a doctor of Ayurveda. Both my parents were gone. We celebrated a milestone wedding anniversary. Both the parents are gone. Like, so every occasion or a simple Diwali or Holi, I couldn't pick up the phone and call my father. So every year the intensity might decrease, but something might happen and anyone could get triggered and the intensity goes up. So to hold space for your own grieving, because grieving is never linear, it's never in defined stages. You could be angry for 6 months, in acceptance for 1 month, in denial for 2 weeks, angry again. So just the way we love, our pets and our little children and other people, to share that same love and compassion. And I think I cover that throughout the book with the tips. Like, there is a dark side, but there's also light. So if you address and acknowledge the dark side, you find the light. If you think you can go around it, shove it, and push it under the rug, that's when 6 years later you might get triggered.
When my father died, I had to go, and my brother, I had to go back into those places of identity loss. Who are we without our dads? Who are you without your parents? It's almost like we have to grieve that part of our own identity and give ourselves grace before we can move even forward to our new life. And I also, with both my brother and my father, I thought, oh my goodness, the magic is gone. The joy in my life is in the past. And it's not true, but initially it felt like it was true.
Thank you for sharing that, because I've been battling and navigating the identity bit as well. Like I was sharing with you earlier, I am headed to Asia and India. This is my first trip back to India.
Wow, that's
in
big.
11 months. Yeah. And, when my dad was alive the last couple of years, I would travel every quarter to see him, to see my father-in-law. And I have beautiful memories of both the men. But now going there, even though I'm going just to visit my mom-in-law, and, she's looking forward to seeing me, but I'm also aware, like, my parents are gone. And I said to my husband, like, I'm going to, after 25 plus years, I'm going to fill out a mailing address that I've never filled out before. So to some people that could be trivial, but to me, that defines my identity has changed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, I would think that's going to be very big for you. I mean, your country that you grew up in and going back. And
even though you know your father is dead, going back, I imagine it's almost like shocking that you're not going to see him. I mean, I know when I went to see my father in California, I opened the door to the house that my parents lived in, and I expected him to be there, even though I knew he wasn't going to be. It was just like, wow, okay, he's actually not here, and he's not coming back, physically at least.
Yeah,
So.
I think that's hard. Like last afternoon, my husband and I, we were out, and I read the word Mumbai. That's where I would fly into. So it's interesting. I've known Mumbai. And then when I said, it said Mumbai, and all of a sudden it hit me. It was also 11 months of his passing yesterday. And it hit me, oh, Mumbai is no longer what it used to be for me. So it's in stages where the grief hits. Like there are other aspects where I feel things have changed, but I didn't realize, like, reading a name out aloud could be like, oh wow, this absence is so permanent.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know that you said don't be afraid to reveal your dark side, or grief will reveal it. I thought that was interesting because, when you're angry or upset, it's hard to reveal that, and
Yes.
have people accept it.
Absolutely. And I also feel grief turns us all into some kind of a monster. It's larger than us. And it's important to forgive yourself, because if you forgive yourself, you forgive others. In our family, like I shared, the two families grieving, like that's not the time to have a politically correct conversation. Somebody's fuse is going to blow off. Somebody's going to be sadder than the others. Everyone has their own coping mechanism. So it's very important to not have a hierarchy in grief, to not have that comparison, and to hold space for your grief. Because when you do that, I think self-love is about self-worth. And when we love ourselves with all our different sides, including the dark side that grief reveals, we are just more open to accepting others when their grief shows up.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about your book, because I want to say The Loss That Binds Us, 108 Tips on Coping with Grief. I am interested in Ayurvedic. How would I approach that?
So my website, so it's my first name and last name.com, Sweta Vikram. There's a contact form there. You just fill it out, tell me what is it that you're looking for, and I schedule a 20-minute free discovery call.
All right. Now, do you do online counseling about
I
Ayurveda?
do everything online now because I realized the one way to reduce stress in people's life is help with the scheduling. Like someone has a little kid or, an elderly parent or a
Yeah.
life which pulls them in a million directions, and then they have to hop on a train to come see me. No, we can just do this online. So everything is online.
I really had not thought about it for grief particularly. I just thought about it as good health. But I love that idea that it, can be brought into this area. And I know it's going to help a lot of people. Is there anything else you want to tell people about what you're doing or what you want them to know?
Just take care of your well-being, honestly, because the world we live in, I thought pandemic might help us, but I think we've reverted to our old ways, most of us. So it's important to not push your well-being to tomorrow. It's the one thing that should have been done yesterday is your wellness. And it might mean different things to different people, but just focusing on what you need, what your triggers are, what makes you feel really good, what really makes you feel sad. It's important. So when people think wellness, very often they just think about being a certain size, or just losing weight. And I'm talking about holistic wellness, like really being in tune with your body, in tune, because how we feel will impact our work, our relationships, our career, everything that we do. So just unapologetically prioritize you. That's my one suggestion for anyone who's tuning in.
I like that. Unapologetically take care of yourself. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today. Really appreciate it. Great advice and ideas. And good luck on your trip to India.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to talk to both of you. Very grounding.
Shweta, thank you so much. And I love how you said we need to prioritize ourselves. And I think that is so important to take care of ourselves because, we need to be healthy so that we can be around for others. So thank you so much. And thank you for helping people find hope after loss.
I appreciate it.
And thanks everybody for joining us on this show. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.